Hey there, welcome to Witchcraft Fundamentals Lesson 12, Bane Magick. Yes. Okay, so this one's a bit controversial. So when I say Bane Magick, I mean curses and hexes, the gnarly stuff. Now, normally when I do this course, it's all one-on-one, and I know my students, and I have a certain amount of faith that they're going to use the information I give them responsibly. Well, this is YouTube. I don't know you. I don't know what you're going to do with this information. So I thought pretty long and hard about whether or not to actually record this. And I decided, yeah, I'm going to record this because there is a lot of misinformation out there on what curses are and how they work and what they can and cannot do. So yeah, I'm just gonna tell you. Uh, I'm probably gonna get some hate mail for this. Fun. Uh, but if someone's gonna do this, I'd rather they know how than to not know how and have everything go horribly, horribly wrong. Cause then I get called to do cleanup, and I don't like doing cleanup. Not when it's someone else's mess. So we're going to start with a big stream of disclaimers. This information is just information. I do not encourage you to do any of the things I'm about to describe. In fact, I very much discourage you from doing any of the things that I'm going to describe. You are an adult, I hope, and you get to make your own choices. Please choose responsibly. Actions have consequences, and we have to live with them. Further, do not do anything that is against the law where you live. That will get you arrested, and rightfully so. Probably. Do not bully, stalk, harass, or assault someone. Seems like common sense, but let me reiterate. Remember at that very, very beginning, I do hope you have watched all the lessons, because you're not going to be able to do this effectively if you don't know all the previous information. That's why it's the last lesson. But way back in the introduction, I talked about the ethics of my program. And in lesson 1, I talked again about the ethics of my program. And pretty much my only rule is don't be a dick. Take responsibility for your actions and don't be a dick. Don't be a dick with magic either. You are responsible for the consequences of your actions. You're going to have to live with them whether you like them or not. So don't do this kind of thing idly. Very few people should ever do this. But if you encounter this, it is possible that you might piss off someone who is less ethical or less principled, and they might try to do this to you. If you understand how it's done and why it's done, you'll have a better time defending yourself against it. So there's that. So, take this information as the information for curiosity's sake as it is intended. Hopefully you will never have to use it in any way. If you do, I hope it's in defense of yourself or others. And if not, that's your choice. So, we're going to talk about first, why not to hex people. I promise we'll get into the fun stuff, but we have to start with the less fun stuff. Why not to hex? Number 1, hurt people hurt people. Most of the people out there in the world that harm others are themselves the victims of harm. Most people are generally pretty good. Like, there's very few evil people out there. Most people are just people trying to get along. And bad stuff happens. It's no rhyme or reason necessarily. Nobody's fault necessarily. I don't know. Bad things happen. People get hurt. And a lot of times people will pass that hurt on to the people around them. Whether it's the coworker you yell at because your boss yelled at you, whether it's the parent that shouts at their kid because they're having a bad day, whether it's the kid that bullies another kid because they're being bullied, this stuff tends to roll downhill. And if you lash out at someone who's hurting you, it will often make the situation worse. It's a lot of pouring gasoline on a fire. It doesn't actually help a lot of the time. It can really make a bad situation worse, because if somebody is lashing out and you cause them more pain, they're just going to lash out more, and maybe against someone who's less able to defend themselves. That is the number one reason that this is not your go-to when somebody hurts you. Number 2, imperfect information. We don't know what's happening when we're not around. We don't know if the bully is a victim of abuse and has no idea how to tell somebody. We don't know if someone did something utterly unintentional and we read it as an attack. The number of times I've had someone come up to me and say, "Oh, this person cursed me." Did they? Did they really? Unless you know a practitioner that you've pissed off that is less than ethical, chances are real good you've not been cursed. Negative energy happens. It floats around. It coalesces with other negative energy. It makes things bad. And it can feel like an attack. And it's not. Sometimes it is. Most of the time it's really not. Most of the time you're sitting next to someone on the bus that's having a crappy day and their negative energy gets all over you. It's not because that person wants to hurt you. It's not because that person is evil. It's because that person has a bad day and doesn't know how to police their own energy. That's pretty normal. Those people don't deserve to be hexed, in my personal opinion. We don't know the totality of the circumstances in the situation most of the time. That's what divination is for a lot of the time, when you don't know. But just because you think that someone has sent negative energy away, that they've attacked you, that they're deliberately undermining you, that they're harming you, maybe they are. Maybe they are. But please make sure before you do something you can't take back. I am not omniscient. I don't know if somebody's being mean to me because they don't like me and they want me to suffer, or because they're having a bad day, or because they have no idea why what they're saying might be hurtful. It happens, unfortunately. Some people ain't woke at all. And they need to be educated, sometimes harshly. But it's all about making the situation better. The purpose of doing witchcraft is to make your life better. Is this going to make your life better? The last reason for not hexing people, there are many, many, many valid reasons not to hex people, including the repercussions sometimes suck. But another one is people that are super negative, people that are pretty douchey, have a tendency of basically hexing themselves. Remember back when we talked about the very beginning of the spellcasting, I think it was lesson 4, the principle of like attracts like. Positive energy tends to attract positive energy. Negative energy tends to attract negative energy. Aggressive negative energy tends to attract more aggressive negative energy. It's the kind of the death spiral of negativity. Many, many miserable bastards make themselves more miserable without any effort on your part. So it might be better off just to live your life and do the whole, the best revenge is a life well lived thing. You don't have to forgive them. You don't have to give a single fuck about them. Just walk away and live your life. Now, that isn't always an option. There's a time and place for everything, including hexing the shit out of somebody. There are some alternatives to consider first. 1. Protection. If someone is doing harm to you or someone you love, protect that person. Protect yourself. Stop the harm from continuing. That's step 1. Most of the time, this is going to take care of what you can do on the metaphysical level. Remember, magic is just metaphysics. If somebody is beating you up every day, hexing them might be a start, but it's not going to necessarily stop them. If you need quick, mundane results, call the cops. Depending on where you live and what color your skin is. Maybe call the guys at the garage. Depends on who you are. But if you need a mundane solution for a mundane problem, get the mundane solution first. Do your protections. Do whatever you can to protect yourself. Do whatever you need to do, whatever that looks like. The other option is binding. Now, binding is something that is generally done practitioner against practitioner, but can be done practitioner against mundane. The idea is to stop someone's ability to do harm or to do whatever you're binding them from doing. It is something that is designed to stop a behavior. It is to bind that person so they are no longer able to perform whatever the action is that you're binding them against. For the most part, binding is a gray area because you are definitely infringing on someone's free will. My personal rule for binding is I will only bind someone as far as I am willing to be bound. I am willing to bind someone from committing assault, committing rape, committing murder, because I am also willing to be bound against those things. I don't need to do those things. I might bind certain malicious intentions. Once again, because I'm cool with not being able to just cause wanton destruction, because that's not how I roll. It might be how you roll. I don't know you. That's my rule. Other people have their own ethics. That's totally cool. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them. Just saying that's my rule. The only person's behavior I control is my own. So I have my own rules. But those are alternatives. Protection and binding. Now sometimes you gotta punch a Nazi. Sometimes you gotta hex. So, why something might actually cross the line and go from this is unpleasant to time to cut a bitch. Protection. If shielding, warding yourself is not enough, there's a reason the law of the land in the United States is that you are able to do anything to defend yourself or another that is proportionate to the perceived imminent threat. If somebody comes at you with a baseball bat and you think they're going to kill you, well, you can kill them. We call that an affirmative defense. You've still committed manslaughter. Somebody's still dead. But if someone's trying to kill you, you can go all the way up to killing them so that they can't kill you. That's the law here in the United States, certainly in the jurisdiction in which I live. Where you live, things may be different. I am not an expert in international law. My law license is Washington State. Small, one state. But yeah. The good rule of thumb for Bane Magick is proportionate to the perceived threat. If you think someone is coming after you and your protections are not sufficient, depending on your own personal ethics, that might be the time to do some offensive work. Where that line is, only you can draw. Like, I generally draw my line at people that cannot defend themselves being attacked. If it's just me, I can protect myself. If someone goes after someone more vulnerable, that's when I'm more likely to get aggressive about things. Justice, retribution. So, little history lesson for you. A lot of the Bane magic that you see out and about in the world today comes from people that don't have a place in traditional power structures. Women, the impoverished, the displaced, racial minorities, religious minorities, oppressed peoples, enslaved peoples, disenfranchised peoples. When you have no recourse in the system, sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands. There's a lot of revenge movies out there. Taken, very famous revenge movie. No legal recourse to go after them. Well, parents got to do what a parent's got to do to rescue their child, to get justice for their child. That kind of stuff. That is where, if your sister's rapist goes free, well, then you hex the motherfucker. My general rule for myself, take it as with a grain of salt as you will, justice and retribution, I see, is about balancing the scales. And usually it's really about emotional satisfaction and closure, because once the harm has been done, it can never be undone. But my general rule for justice is, if I'm willing to assault someone in the street, like if someone, murdered a friend and got off and I saw them on the street, would I walk up to them and punch them right in the face? Yeah, I would. If I'm willing to go to jail for assault, then I get to hex them. Because I'd be willing to get in that level of trouble. I'd be willing to face those kinds of concrete consequences. If I'm not, harder to say. It really depends on the power disparity. There are certain folks in the world whose harm is utterly disproportionate to the size of their own lives, and, well, they deserve what's coming to them. I feel comfortable with this stuff. Many people don't. It's very individual. It depends on your own ethics, your own morals, your own spiritualities. Your tradition might have very specific rules. There are traditions that have affirmative retribution rules where if somebody, badmouths your clan, you are required to seek justice. Otherwise, you are dishonoring your clan. You're tacitly admitting whatever defamation has been said. I'm not from one of those cultures, and I'm happy about that. But who's to say that that's wrong? Well, the law. But don't be judgy if you don't know the whole situation. And I don't. I don't know the whole situation because I don't know you. I don't know what your circumstances are. I don't know what you're trying to deal with. But I hope it is either to stop a harm from happening or a really important scale balancing. I know some folks that like to consider themselves agents of karma. Karma doesn't need your help. But you might disagree with what karma thinks. You get to make your own choices, but you need to live with the repercussions of those choices, and there are many. The other reason people tend to sling hexes is because they're dicks. We've discussed this already. I won't belabor the point. Don't be a dick. So, you've decided you want to sling a hex. The first thing that you need to think about before you hex somebody is what you're actually trying to accomplish. Are you just trying to hurt someone because they hurt you or someone you care about? Are you trying to stop a harm from continuing? Are you trying to make a bad situation better? What are you actually trying to accomplish? Because if you don't know exactly what you want to happen, this is where things go wrong. Poorly managed anger tends to go awry. You need to understand what you actually want to see happen and why. What need in you is being satisfied by what you're doing? And is this really going to satisfy that need in your heart, in your soul? That hole you're trying to fill, is this actually going to do that? Or are you going to do something terrible and regret it? That's the first thing you need to think about. What do you actually want to have happen? And if it actually happens, how are you going to feel about that? Because you're going to have to live with having caused it. Yeah. A hex is like any other spell. The main difference is it is fueled by extreme energy. You can have a wishy-washy prosperity spell. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work very well. If you are enraged, wounded, inflamed so much that you are willing to take on it whatever repercussion of doing negative magic is going to bring your way, it's like a wildfire. Like, the amount of energy that is in that kind of emotion, I don't care how cold and calculating your version of this type of rage is. It is extreme. No one feels wishy-washy about slinging a hex. At least not anyone I've ever met. I'm sure it's possible. But for the most part, you have to really, really want this. That's a lot of energy. And energy that is that all-encompassing, that potent, you've got to channel that very, very clearly and very, very specifically. We're talking surgical strike, or it's going to go awry. It's going to have unintended consequences. There's going to be collateral damage. That's not going to help. It's not. If you just lob negative energy in the general vicinity of your enemy, who are they with? Where are they? Who else is going to get hurt? Why is that worth it? Really? So I urge you, think about these things. Next up is Backlash. There are consequences to doing magic. Now, we talked about this back in the spellcasting lessons. When you do magic, You are creating an energy. And the whole purpose is that when you create that energy and intention, that type of energy should come back to you through the manifestation of your will. Well, if you're gathering a bunch of rage-filled harm energy, like attracts like, guess what's coming your way? There are ways of mitigating that. Yes, there are. But if you're thinking bad thoughts, then you've got some bad energy. Like attracts like. It's just how it goes. Sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. Only you know your lines. So to minimize backlash for this type of action, as much as possible, try to be ethical about these things. Depends on what your ethics look like, honestly. Cleanse. Cleanse a lot. I mean, a lot. If you have not done like a 9-day cleansing bath process, this is where you start. You do your negative magic, then you do the 9-day full detoxifying, cleansing, whatever you need to do. Ground. If you have not ground while holding jet, sitting on hematite, on this with your soles of your feet on the earth, this is where you start. This is where you take everything up to 11. Cleanse, ground, protect, ward, all that stuff. When you're done with the hex, you ground, you cleanse, you then go do something super positive. Like go volunteer at an orphanage positive. If you've just lobbed a huge truck of negativity out in the world, you need to create a huge truck of positivity to make up for that. You have done something to the energies around you, and it's bad. So you need to now make up for that. Balance the scales. People have different opinions on what it means if you've had a spirit go and do the thing. Are you still causing that energetic imbalance? Are you carrying that weight, or is that spirit carrying that weight? If you've bounced energy around different sources, where is the spiritual weight? Personally, I believe it lies in the intention. You had the intention, you've got the weight. If you're not willing to do a bunch of good to offset some bad, perhaps you should reconsider doing the bad. Links. The other thing you need to be super, super careful of, and you need to decide whether or not it's worth it, is much of the time, not all the time, but much of the time, if you have enough hate to hex somebody, you have created an energetic link between you and that person. Now, sometimes that's worth maintaining to see the other person suffer. Most of the time it isn't. You can't move on while that's happening. But sometimes it's worth waiting around and watching them burn. Keep in mind, if you are energetically linked to someone, you need to be very, very careful about what you do and what comes back across that link. What gets drained from you, what gets pushed from them. So yeah, if you don't have the ability to control cords or links, perhaps hexing is not yet for you. So, in recap, the rules. Be specific. Be extremely specific. Good hex is a surgical strike, not a carpet bomb. I personally will always have a physical representation of my target before I do any kind of negative working to facilitate that specificity. It is perfectly possible to just throw a ball of hate at somebody. No tools, no prep, no representation. You can do that. You totally can. It's not really a great idea, but you can. You're going to have a much, much better time You'd have a much easier time controlling your intentions if you've got some kind of physical target, something tangible, be it a photo, a poppet, a symbol, whatever, a candle even, whatever. You do you, but have something that shows exactly where you want this energy to go and the boundaries where it cannot go past. Boundaries are super important. There's a reason that so many kind of classical curses involve, like, get a lock of hair or a fingernail or a photo, that kind of thing, to have that really, really concrete link between your magical intentions and its target. It's because it works. And you don't want to risk this energy going anywhere but where you want it to go. And last but not least, be certain. Do not cast a wishy-washy hex. Bad things will follow. Make sure you really want this to happen, because if you do it right, it will. If you just casually pissed off, but you're going to get over it, this is not the time for a hex. Like, you need to hate a lot. Like, it's got to be eating you up for it to be worth this. Be certain. Be certain this is what you want to have happen. Be certain you're willing to live with the results and any kind of backlash. If you're not sure, don't do it. Do something else. You're trying to get from point A to point B. There's a lot of ways to get there. Choose a different path. So now that I've shouted at you for a while, we'll get to some fun bits. Common hexes. So, just a reminder of the disclaimer from the beginning. I do not encourage you to actually do any of these things literally ever. But, for informational purposes, here are some things that are often done by people who do these types of things. Number 1, flip somebody off and swear at them. It's called cursing for a reason. You're throwing a ball of hate at somebody. Negative attracts negative, and thus you have just hexed someone, whether you really meant to or not. Now, if they've got any kind of shielding, this is going to go straight off of them. It's no big deal. But if you do this with intention, it's a hex. If you do this without intention, it may still be a hex. You can get somebody to hex themselves. If you tell someone they are cursed, and they're the kind of person that would believe that, sometimes they'll run with it and just death spiral themselves energetically with no extra effort on your part. It's a super douche move, but it can be super effective. Mirror spells. There's a reason I don't recommend mirror shields, and we talked about this back in our defensive magic lesson, I believe lesson 8. Mirror spells are if someone sends negativity at you, hits the mirror, goes back to them. Sometimes they do, any harm that is sent to me, send it back to the casters times 3. Sounds real good, doesn't it? As I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson, people that are wounded tend to wound people. So if someone is sending you negative energy because they've been hurt, you send it back times 3, they're even more hurt, and then they do it even more. Not super effective at stopping the problem. For the most part, I do not do mirror spells. I have to truly believe that someone is doing things intentionally, and that my mirror spell is not going to cause harm to innocent collateral folk. Truth spells. Ooh. It's very Harry Potter, the Veritaserum. You can do spells for malicious clarity, to help someone to truly understand what a dick move they pulled. This is where if somebody is not necessarily a bad person, but they have done a terrible thing, however unwittingly, and they need to understand what they did so that they never ever do it again, do a truth spell. I tend to call these Dorian Gray's mirror spells, where it's looking at the truth of yourself in the face and might be really horrifying. It's fun in a really malicious kind of way. Poppets. Now this is where we get into the truly awful stereotype of the voodoo doll. A poppet is a representation of a human. Sometimes it looks like what popular culture calls a voodoo doll. Sometimes it does not. I've seen people make poppets out of felt. I've seen them out of paper. I have seen them made out of dollar store Barbie dolls, action figures, whatever. Doesn't really matter. But it's just a effigy of some kind of your target. Now, if you have a photo, a lock of hair, an intimate item, you can put that inside the poppet to truly make that poppet a representation of the target. And then whatever you do to the poppet happens to the target to a certain energetic extent. Yeah, that's fun. And potentially gnarly. When I do bindings, I actually generally make a poppet, and I'll write on a piece of paper all the terrible things that need to be bound, and use that as the stuffing of the poppet, and then I will wrap it up in marine cord, because marine cord has almost no give, so there's no slack, no wiggle room. Yeah, it's a thing you can do. Next one. You can bind and bury a tongue to stop gossip. It's a common kind of folk spell. Well, common. You'll find it in a lot of books. But it's one of those spells that, yes, it will in fact bind someone against, speaking certain things depending on how you've bound them. But where you bury it and how you've bound it might also inflict harm on the person trying to do the talking, and that turns it into a pure curse. Bury it in a graveyard, you might cause some real negative consequences. I don't really recommend it. Ice magic. So, depending on various traditions, ice magic has a lot of different forms. In this specific context only, you can create basically a simulacrum, a poppet, essentially, in kind of a human form. You can get ice molds for almost anything, particularly like the cool silicone ones. You can get one in vaguely human feature, put little inclusions in it to represent the person, and then you can lay it outside to melt into nothing. Problem solved. Hex jars, charms, and talismans is when you put together stuff. Fishing hooks, feathers, sticks and briars and things. Chilies. Things. Bind them together with your terrible intentions and then put them somewhere appropriate so that they can spread malaise. Sometimes you'll bury it on the property of the target. Things like that. I tend not to do these because they can be picked up by someone other than the target, potentially. And I'm not comfortable with the possibility of collateral damage, so I don't tend to do this, but it is pretty traditional. One of my favorite stories about hex charms and talismans is there was two football clubs in Mexico that were competing in a very important match, and each team's fans had hired brujos to hex the opposing team. And so each of the teams had to hire a curandero to go and clean up all of the things that were like laid at the doors of the headquarters of the football teams. Football being soccer in Mexico. It's harsh, man. It's a sport. Don't. This is not a. I would not, with my personal ethics, go to that level for a sports team. Obviously, there are those that feel differently. Crossing powders. Now, powders are really interesting. There's like you'll see crossing powders in things like hoodoo and voodoo and certain like Appalachian folk magic and stuff like that. Tends to be a lot of it in the southeast of the United States and the Caribbean, that kind of thing. I am not an expert in those traditions, so I apologize if I misspeak anything. But as crossing powders have come into my set of knowledge, it's basically you create powders of nasty intention and you put them somewhere your target is going to be. And then they pick it up, be it on the soles of their shoes, on their clothes, the things. And the negative energy is transferred to them. This is another one I don't tend to do for the same reason I don't tend to do the talisman. I don't have control of someone else's physical space, so I don't know that they're going to be the one that's going to be the contact with the powder. Even if it's like, a bad boss, I'm not going to put powder on their office chair because I don't know when the cleaning staff's going to come through or their secretary's going to come in and sit down for whatever reason. I don't do that just because I don't trust it. Maybe it's just because I don't know how to use them correctly. But guess what? If you don't know how to do something correctly, probably don't use it. Go with another method that you do know how to use correctly. Getting from point A to point B. Many ways of getting there. Yeah, the most famous crossing powder is something called Goofer Dust, which is kind of... It may be apocryphal. Like, it could just be a legendary thing that's never actually existed, but it's a collection of things that you can use to hex someone to death. Many people say that it has never existed and that it's just a propaganda piece against practitioners that are just trying to live their lives that the media made up because it sounded cool. I don't know. I don't know the answer. But it's a thing. Google it. It's fascinating. Wasting curses. These are fun. I have only ever used a wasting curse to end a bad situation. So, the way these things are generally intended when they're used as Bane Magick is you make a biodegradable representation of the thing that you want to waste away to nothing, and then you let it rot. Or even better, cover it with honey, get it devoured by ants kind of thing. Make something waste away, get eaten away, rot away. It's very gnarly. If you've got, obviously if you do this with a representation of a person, that's a hex. If you do this with a sigil or representation of a negative situation, you might accelerate the natural ending of that situation. Now, because you're making it waste away quickly in a very gnarly way, there might be some unintended negative consequences. Make sure you're willing to deal with that before you do this kind of thing. Another common bit of folklore, less common in actual practice in my experience. Your experiences may vary, the experiences of others may vary, but there's a lot of media where, the evil sorcerer summons a demon from the pits of hell and sends it against, the heroes. Uh, yeah, I mean, you can. You can ask a metaphysical entity to go and do the dirty work for you. Um, I would consider that advanced work because you see, when you involve something with its own sentient thoughts and feelings and opinions and interests, you don't have absolute control of their actions. They might decide to do something else, something more, something different, and you've unleashed that. For the most part, the type of metaphysical entities that are willing to go and thrash somebody on your behalf are not. Their mores are different than most of humanity's. And they might do things differently. And that's a risk that you need to be willing to take. And it's also something you need to have the ability to deal with should it go rogue. So I don't really recommend it. It's very dangerous. Like, that's where it's really genuinely dangerous. In the movies, you'll often see, well, like the evil wizard will like bind a demon to their will and send them out to do the terrible things, and then the demon gets free and eats the wizard's face. Well, yeah. If you summon an entity that enjoys hurting people and then set it loose, well, it's probably going to hurt you too. Unless you've got a really interesting relationship with that entity. And in which case you do not need advice from me. You've got this covered. There's all kinds out there. It's not what I would do, but you do you. Another fun one is curse tablets. These were very common in ancient Rome and ancient Greece. You would actually have a tablet of lead, and you would pound out your curse, and then you would bury that lead tablet in your neighbor's fields or throw it in their well, and then they die of lead poisoning. That's what we call murder, children. It's frowned upon in most polite societies. Don't do that. Don't salt the earth, don't poison the waters, don't make the world a worse place because you don't like somebody. There are better ways of doing that. But fascinating bit of history. So those are a bunch of things that people do in terms of hexes. Any spell you can do can be made into a hex. It's all about your intention. It's a hammer. A hammer is a tool. You can use it to build a home or crush somebody's skull. It's all in your intent. Now, once you've performed a hex, whichever method you have chosen, that I hope you have not chosen, you might have stuff left over. If you've made a jar or a talisman or, a poppet, at the end of your working, when the magic has run its course, it might be an hour, a day, a moon cycle, or longer. But when you're done, you've got to deal with your leftovers. Please don't be the kind of person that just drops them off into the forest and sees what happens. That's what we call a douche move. When you are done, you need to dispose of your leftover physical components. They are soaked in volatile energy. You need to discharge and ground that energy. Often things like running water, burying it in salt, burying it in the earth, burning it and burying the ashes, scattering the ashes, throwing things into the ocean if it's not going to then poison the waters. The most important thing is ground the energy, cleanse off the intentions, and then dispose of those remains. Never use hex components again. Like, unless you're going to continue the hex, you cannot use a stone in a hex, cleanse it, and then use it in a prosperity spell. that type of energy, theoretically, you can cleanse it to the point where it's good again, but I would not advocate risking that. If you've gone to the extent of properly casting a hex, get yourself some new stones. Do not try to reuse that stuff for another purpose. Bad idea. Um, I wouldn't reuse it for anything. Like, just start afresh. Save the cross-contamination. Yeah. So when you're done, you have to properly dispose of any detritus. If you have components that you gathered but you didn't use, that's probably okay. But anything that was actively used is kaput. It's done. Never again. So that brings us to common defenses. The number one way to defeat a hex, and my personal favorite, is to laugh at it. I once had a gal that was very, very envious of the respect I had from other practitioners. And she came up and declared that she had hexed me and the world would see my downfall. And I literally fell to the floor laughing. It was sad. It was so sad it was funny. And guess what? Everybody else laughed at her. It's amazing. Laughter will diffuse negative energy and negative intentions faster than anything else you can do. It's just the way it works. Shadow work is another one. The reason that lesson comes before this one. If you do shadow work correctly, consistently, there are fewer vulnerable points for negative energy to enter into your auric fields. Negative energy does its work by entering and essentially contaminating your personal energies. So if your energies are real solid, it's much more difficult for that to get in. It's part of why, at a certain point, you kind of have to do shadow work. Grounding shields. For most of the negative energy you're going to actually encounter out in the wilds, simple shields will do 99% of your work for you. Like, even if somebody does send, like, man, I hate that person. The equivalent of, like, the evil eye. A healthy aura and some decent shields, it's really going to take care of most of it. You have to be a pretty dedicated, precise practitioner to really be successful with Bane Magick. Regular cleansings. If you have been cursed, and it does happen, particularly if you are a practitioner that works with other practitioners who are occasional dumbasses, it happens. I've had folks try to hex me a number of times because I'm opinionated and deal with practitioners a lot. I piss them off. Cleansings. For me, I do limpias, which is a form of curanderismo, type of spiritual cleansing. Lots and lots of baños and smoke cleansings and sound cleansings, and I do like egg limpias. Google egg limpias; they're amazing. You can do like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentacle. You can have, or is it pentagram? I don't do the LBRP, so I forget which one it is. You can go to shamans that can do energetic healings on you. There are all kinds of specialist practitioners that will do energetic cleansings on you. Any type of formal kind of heavy-duty cleansing can break the connection of a hex and help get rid of it. If someone says that you have to pay them like $500 to break the hex, they're probably scamming you. Practitioners deserve to be paid for their time and energy, but you shouldn't need to take out a loan or not be able to pay your rent. There's a fine line, unfortunately, between practitioners being paid what they're worth, and scammers making everything worse for the rest of us. I don't like them because they make my life more difficult. Um, if you do go to someone for a cleansing and their price seems outrageous, like $500, $900, you know, if someone's charging you $200 an hour, $200 an hour, if they're good. Uh, but if it's something ridiculous, something that is utterly outside of your price range, and they don't have any sliding scales or anything like that, check their references, like really do. And if they don't offer references, ooh, then you're definitely being scammed. Be careful. Unfortunately, there are a lot of unscrupulous people out there. Next up, bigger, badder allies. This is a lot of what I do. If you have metaphysical allies and they are bigger, badder, and scarier, more potent than your aggressor's allies, well, it's the whole "my brother is bigger than your brother and he'll beat you up" kind of energy. But it's very effective. If you find hex components on your property, if anyone ever watched the television show Warehouse 13, TLDR, detectives finding cursed artifacts, essentially. They've got special gloves and bags that when they find these, like, objects, they only pick them up with the special gloves, and then it goes in the special bag to, like, neutralize everything. That's what you do when you find hex components. You never touch them with your bare skin under any circumstances. This is where I will, depending on what it is, I'll get, like, disposable chopsticks and, like, pick them up with that and get rid of them and just burn everything, including the disposable chopsticks. Don't ever touch hex. If you think something even might be a magical object left by somebody else, don't touch it with your bare skin. Just don't. If you find something that you're pretty sure is like a hex talisman or something, traditionally you do something like get a piece of black silk cloth, pick it up with tweezers, chopsticks, gloves, put it in the black silk, put whatever implement you use to pick it up in the black silk, wrap it all up, and you dispose of it. If it's something that can be burned, you burn it with fire. If it's not something that can be burned, you're going to want to dispose of it in a public trash can at least a mile from your house. Things like gas stations and public parks are public trash cans where you can generally get rid of these things without doing terrible unintended things. And then, if all of these things you try, and you still think you're cursed, and you go to a professional, they think you're cursed, that's when you go into full-on hex-breaking rituals. Dorothy Morrison has a great hex-breaking ritual in her book Utterly Wicked. I think that's just been reprinted, so I'll put that down in the resources. But there's lots of material out there on how to do hex breakings. My book has a hex breaking ritual in it. So there are ways of doing that. But for the most part, actual hexes out in the wild are super uncommon. They're very rarely worth the effort. So chances are real good. Even if you think you're cursed, you're probably not. Good thing is, you ground, you cleanse, you center, you cleanse some more, you ground, you cleanse again. If you're not cursed, all you are is really grounded and cleansed. And if you are, you've probably gotten rid of it. So when in doubt, ground and cleanse is the basics. If you think you might possibly be cursed, then see how you feel. So yeah, that's the most important things that I think you need to know about curses and hexes. Yes, those words I use interchangeably. Sure, there are people that'll have specific thoughts and opinions on how to use those words, and I don't, so I use them interchangeably. Um, Note that at no point did I call this black magic, because that's racist. Um, yeah, don't use that term. It's terrible. This is Bane magic or malefic magic. It's the bad stuff. It's the negative stuff. Don't colorize it. That's just an artifact of colonialism. So yeah. On that note, your homework, should you choose to attempt it, think about where your own limits are. Where is your line where something goes from I'm pissed off and I don't like that to I'm enraged and I'm willing to do something and deal with the consequences. Figure out what kind of consequences you're actually willing to live with. Know where your line is, so if someone does cross it, you'll be ready. And if you think that you're a target of a hex, what do you think you would do about it? If you thought one of your friends was being hexed, what would you do about it? Have a little triage plan. You know, I sincerely hope you never, ever have to deal with this kind of thing, but it can happen. Have a plan, be prepared. I have a little magical defense kit. It's in a little tiffin, those aluminum Indian lunchboxes. And so when things happen and I get a call, I just pick up my little kit and I go and I take care of business. I come home and I cleanse things and refill my kit. Because I'm the kind of person that gets those calls. So yeah, that is Bane Magick, and that is the substantive part of this Witchcraft Fundamentals course. I'm going to put up one more video of just kind of conclusions and what the next steps might be for your journey. But this is the meat and potatoes. You now know all of the most important concepts for the fundamentals of witchcraft. So have a great day. Bye.